order, before, you're able to gather the information and the forms. I think that's one of the first struggles. How do I get a domestic violence restraining order? Where do I go? How do I fill out the forms? I think that's the number one struggle. But what I recommend my clients and, just anybody that's going through domestic violence is start documenting it. And if you're under threat, if your children are under threat, you contact the police. You tell your healthcare providers, you tell somebody that you're going through a domestic violence, so there's a record of that. And when you're contacting the police, and this incident is happening right now, you ask the police for an emergency protective order, so you have that protection pending you getting a domestic violence restraining order. So that's kind of something you could do in the meantime while you're getting your paperwork and going to court to file a restraining order. So to get the restraining order, you need to have timelines of the incidents and the type of abuse you've suffered and for how long, who was there, who was the witnesses. So you want to have like a declaration from you that, that says all this information. So, start keeping notes, diary of everything that's happening. If you have pictures, you want to have that for filing that restraining order. You want to get all the information about where that person is, and so that it'll be easier for you to serve that person the domestic violence restraining order. You also want to start thinking about what your requests are going to be in the restraining order. Are you going to ask for spousal support? Are you going to ask for attorney's fees? Are you going to ask for child custody? Are you going to ask for a move out order so you and your children can stay in that home while you guys cool off and deal with this domestic violence restraining order? You decide if you want to get a permanent or restraining order or a temporary restraining order. So once you fill out all the forms, you can go to the court, or you can go to the self-help if you don't have the resources to afford an attorney, or you can go to an attorney. They'll help you fill out the forms. It'll be submitted with all the evidence to the judge. The judge will make temporary orders to grant or deny your request. You'll get that back, and if they're granted, you can go and serve that other person. So somebody 18 years or older, unrelated to the case, you can use a process server. Or any family member or a friend, anybody but you can serve that to them, and those orders will come into effect. So automatically that person has a restraining order on them, and they will be registered in the CLETS restraining system. So if any violations occur, they will be arrested. So it's very important for them to get served, the domestic violence restraining order once it's been granted. So they'll give a hearing date as well to discuss the restraining order, because the other side will have their opportunity to be heard in court on the allegations and the grounds of that restraining order. So they have 30 days to file their response. At that first hearing, they'll file that response, or their request for a continuance to get a response going. They might request visitation. The judge might address some of your requests at that time, or they might just continue it. What you have is a temporary restraining order. If you want to get a permanent restraining order, there has to be a trial. The judge has to hear both sides of what happened and make a determination by a preponderance of evidence of whether domestic violence occurred or not. So if the judge finds that there was domestic violence, then you will get a permanent restraining order for 1 year, 2 years, up to 5 years. You can get that. The problem is that trials are very expensive, and having witnesses and exhibits and cross-examinations, preparing somebody for a trial, and having a domestic violence victim go to court, see their abuser, and stand up for themselves, it's very hard. So sometimes you can end up settling the case and just agree that you stay away from me, I get to keep the house. It's called a peaceful conduct order. Some people opt to choose that and kind of just say that I've cooled off. I think that person has learned their lesson. I either want to just get a divorce now, or I want to just drop this restraining order and just move on with the divorce process and just have these terms, because that DVRO, the domestic violence restraining order, stays on that person's record. So if that person has to go work, he or she is the only employed person there, it's going to limit their ability to find employment or maintain employment. So a restraining order is a big deal, and having it on your record is a big deal. But you also have to weigh, is it important for you to keep that restraining order? So if that person keeps violating that restraining order and you are afraid of your life and safety, it's in your best interest to go to trial and get that permanent restraining order for you and your child. You can also, in the DVRO, in the restraining order process, you can also ask that the children be added as protected parties if they were witnesses to the domestic violence, and if they are threatened by that as well. So because of that, the other side, the abuser might not get visitation. They might have things like supervised visits through a professional or a non-professional. So that's kind of the process of getting a restraining order. So trial is probably the hardest part about getting that restraining order to be permanent. So you can decide how you want to pursue that. If you want to just have a temporary restraining order so that you can cool off and figure out if you want to get a permanent restraining order, completely your decision. And then later on, you can get that restraining renewed as well. If there's grounds for that, you can petition the court to get it renewed as well for another year, 2 years. So it's a very powerful tool for domestic violence victims as well, that restraining order. So